A guy sends out a free email 3 times a week. No office, no employees, no inventory. 18 months later, he sells that email list for 8 figures. Not a typo. 8 figures for a newsletter. That sounds absurd until you understand what he actually built, because a newsletter was never really the product. It was the wrapper around something far more valuable, a direct line into thousands of inboxes that no algorithm, no platform, and no rival could ever quietly take away from him. Today, we're breaking down the real economics behind the newsletter business, why sponsors are lining up to pay thousands of dollars for a single mention, why the subscriber list itself is worth more than the content sitting inside it, and why some of the smartest operators in media have quietly stopped chasing followers and started chasing something the algorithm can never touch. Stick around, because by the end of this, you'll understand why the least glamorous format in media might actually be the most valuable one. A newsletter isn't really a content business. It's an attention business with a distribution channel that can't be deplatformed overnight. Every other form of media, social posts, videos, podcasts, lives on rented land, subject to an algorithm's mood, a platform policy change, or a sudden shift in what gets recommended. Email doesn't work that way. Once someone subscribes, that relationship belongs entirely to the publisher, stored as a list of addresses the writer can message directly, forever, regardless of what any platform decides to do next. That ownership is the entire foundation of the model. The content itself, the actual writing, is really just the mechanism that earns the right to keep showing up in someone's inbox. The real asset being built issue after issue isn't the archive of past emails. It's the growing list of people who've proven, by opening and reading, that they trust this particular voice enough to keep letting it in. Everything else, the sponsorships, the subscriptions, the eventual acquisition offer, is really just a downstream consequence of how well that trust has been maintained over time. Almost every successful newsletter starts completely free, and that's not generosity. It's strategy. A free newsletter removes all friction to subscribing, which means the list can grow fast. And a fast-growing list is exactly what makes the business valuable to advertisers before a single dollar of subscription revenue ever comes in. Once that free audience reaches a meaningful size, the smartest operators layer in a paid tier: premium deep dives, exclusive data, a members-only community, something the free version doesn't include, converting a small percentage of loyal free readers into recurring paying subscribers. This mirrors the classic freemium model used across software and media for decades, except email converts unusually well, because unlike a social feed, every single subscriber actually sees the pitch to upgrade, since it lands directly in their inbox instead of getting buried by an algorithm that decides who sees what. A newsletter with even a modest paid conversion rate on a sizable free list can generate meaningful, predictable monthly revenue long before advertising ever enters the picture. And because that revenue renews automatically each month rather than requiring a fresh sale every time, it gives the business a stability that pure sponsorship income, which can dry up during a slow advertising quarter, simply doesn't offer on its own. Sponsors pay newsletters far more per reader than they pay almost any other advertising channel, and once you understand the math, it makes complete sense. Newsletter open rates routinely are run several times higher than social media engagement rates, and unlike a scrolling feed, a newsletter reader has actively chosen to open and read this specific message, giving a sponsor genuine, undivided attention for a few seconds rather than competing against an endless scroll of distractions. Pricing typically runs on a cost per thousand opens basis, and well-targeted newsletters in lucrative niches, finance, tech, business, can command rates many times higher than typical display advertising, because the audience is precisely the kind of engaged, high-intent reader a brand actually wants to reach. A newsletter with 100,000 engaged subscribers can charge thousands of dollars for a single sponsored placement, and successful publishers often book that same slot repeatedly, sometimes months in advance, because sponsors return once they see how directly newsletter traffic converts into actual customers rather than just impressions. Some sponsors even negotiate performance-based deals on top of the flat placement fee, paying an additional bonus for every click or sign up the newsletter drives, which only works because email traffic is trackable end-to-end in a way that many other advertising formats simply aren't. Every subscriber has a cost, whether that cost is paid directly through advertising or invested indirectly through hours spent creating shareable content. Paid acquisition, running ads specifically to drive newsletter signups, gives a publisher precise control over growth speed. And successful newsletters treat this exactly like customer acquisition cost in any subscription business, calculating exactly how much a new subscriber is worth in future sponsorship and subscription revenue before deciding how aggressively to spend acquiring more of them. Organic growth, referral programs, guest appearances on podcasts, social content that funnels back to the sign-up page costs less in cash, but far more in time and creative energy. The smartest newsletter operators blend both channels deliberately, using paid acquisition to hit growth targets quickly while building organic referral loops that keep bringing in new subscribers essentially for free once they're properly set up. Either way, the entire business ultimately runs on one simple equation. As long as a subscriber's long-term value to the business exceeds what it costs to acquire them, growth is not just possible. It's mathematically justified to pursue aggressively. Publishers who lose sight of that equation, chasing raw subscriber counts without tracking what each one actually costs, can end up with an impressive-looking list that quietly loses money every single month it keeps growing. Growing a list means nothing if people quietly stop opening every issue. And churn is the silent tax on every newsletter business. Unlike a subscription that simply auto-renews in the background, a newsletter reader has to actively choose to open every single email, which means engagement, not just raw subscriber count, is what actually determines whether a list remains valuable to sponsors and worth paying for as a paid tier. A list that looks impressive on paper but has a declining open rate is worth far less than a smaller, highly engaged list that opens consistently, and sophisticated sponsors know exactly how to check that difference before agreeing to pay premium rates. Successful publishers actively manage this by regularly removing inactive subscribers who never open anything, since a smaller, more engaged list often commands better sponsorship rates than a bloated one padded with dead addresses. Consistency of delivery, showing up reliably on the same days at the same quality, is what keeps churn low, since readers build a habit around a newsletter the same way they build a habit around a favorite show. Miss that rhythm too many times, and even loyal subscribers quietly stop expecting the next issue, which is a far harder habit to rebuild than it was to establish in the first place. At the smallest scale, one person can run an entire newsletter business alone, writing, editing, sending, and managing sponsorships out of a single laptop, which is exactly why the model has such an appealing cost structure compared to almost any other media business. As the list and revenue grow, successful operators typically bring on a research assistant to help with sourcing, an editor to sharpen the final draft, and eventually a dedicated sponsorship salesperson whose entire job is filling the ad calendar months in advance. This staffing curve mirrors any lean media business. Adding headcount only once revenue clearly justifies it, and the marginal cost of sending an issue to an extra 10,000 subscribers is essentially zero, unlike a physical product business where scale brings proportional cost increases. That razor-thin marginal cost structure is a huge part of why newsletter margins can look so favorable once a list reaches meaningful scale, since the fixed cost of producing each issue stays roughly the same whether it reaches 10,000 inboxes or 500,000. Compare that to a physical newspaper, where every additional reader means another printed copy, another delivery cost, another marginal expense, and it becomes obvious why so many traditional publishers have spent the last decade trying to rebuild exactly this kind of leverage inside their own digital operations. Modern newsletter platforms have made launching easier than ever, but they've also introduced a dependency question every serious operator has to think through carefully. Hosted platforms typically take a percentage of paid subscription revenue in exchange for handling the technical infrastructure, payment processing, and email delivery, which is a fair trade in the early days but becomes a meaningful cost once revenue scales into real money. The more important question is portability. Whether a publisher can export their actual subscriber list and email addresses and take that list to a different platform if pricing, policy, or reliability ever becomes a problem. Publishers who never confirm this arrangement can find themselves in the exact same platform dependency trap that email was supposed to solve in the first place, discovering too late that their entire audience is functionally locked inside someone else's system. This is why the most sophisticated newsletter operators treat platform selection as a genuinely serious business decision. Not just a technical setup step, prioritizing true data ownership and export rights over flashy features that don't actually protect the underlying asset. Some operators go a step further and maintain their own backup export of the full subscriber list on a regular schedule, treating it with the same seriousness a business owner would treat a backup of their customer database. Because in this business, the list isn't just an asset, it's effectively the entire company. A newsletter business gets meaningfully easier to run the longer it survives, and that's not luck. It's a genuine flywheel effect built directly into the model. A larger list attracts better sponsors fund higher quality content and paid promotion, better content and promotion attract even more subscribers. And the cycle repeats, each turn a little easier than the last. Reputation compounds too. Since a newsletter that consistently delivers real value earns word-of-mouth referrals that cost nothing to acquire, unlike the expensive early days when every subscriber had to be earned through direct outreach or paid advertising. This is exactly why newsletter valuations tend to reward sustained consistency over flashy short-term growth spikes, since a buyer evaluating the business is really evaluating how durable and self-reinforcing that flywheel has actually become, not just how large the list happens to be on the day of the sale. The most valuable newsletter businesses rarely rely on a single revenue stream, since sponsorship and subscription revenue alone leaves an operator fully exposed to shifts in the advertising market or subscriber sentiment. Successful publishers layer in additional income, paid courses teaching the exact expertise the newsletter is already known for, affiliate partnerships promoting relevant tools and services their audience already trusts, live events and communities that turn passive readers into paying members, and even branded merchandise for newsletters with a strong enough personality behind them. Each of these additional streams draws on the exact same underlying asset, the trust and attention already built with the subscriber base, which means the marginal cost of launching them is far lower than building an entirely new audience from scratch. A newsletter that successfully diversifies this way stops looking like a single media property and starts looking like a genuine media company with several complementary, mutually reinforcing revenue lines. That structure also protects the business against the single biggest risk any media operator faces. A shift in one market alone, since a soft quarter for advertising spend, can be offset by steady course sales or membership renewals happening at the exact same time. Newsletter businesses have become genuinely attractive acquisition targets in recent years, and understanding how they get valued explains exactly why. Buyers typically price a newsletter as a multiple of its annual profit, and that multiple climbs significantly higher when the business shows low churn, diversified revenue across sponsorship and subscriptions, and a clean, exportable subscriber list rather than one trapped inside a single platform. Media companies and private equity-backed publishing groups actively acquire smaller, well-run newsletters specifically to fold them into a larger portfolio, sharing sponsorship sales infrastructure across multiple properties and instantly increasing efficiency on both sides of the deal. A founder who spends years building consistent, trustworthy content and a genuinely engaged list often discovers that asset is worth a multiple of what any individual year of newsletter income ever generated. Precisely because a buyer isn't purchasing content, they're purchasing a proven, repeatable direct line into a specific, valuable audience. Some founders sell outright for a lump sum, while others negotiate an earn-out structure, staying on to write for a year or two under new ownership while the acquiring company folds the sponsorship sales into its larger, more efficient advertising operation. Let's actually run the numbers on a thriving newsletter operation. Revenue comes from sponsorship placements sold on a rolling monthly calendar, plus recurring subscription revenue from a paid tier layered on top of the free list. Expenses stay remarkably lean: platform fees, a small content and research team, and occasional paid acquisition spend to keep list growth steady. Because the marginal cost of reaching each additional subscriber is close to zero, profit margins on a well-run newsletter business can significantly outperform almost any other media format, since there's no printing cost, no production crew, and no distribution infrastructure standing between the content and the reader. A newsletter that reaches meaningful scale with strong engagement can generate profit margins that would be the envy of nearly any traditional media business, which is exactly the kind of leverage that has quietly attracted so many serious operators and investors into this space over the past several years. So is owning a newsletter business actually profitable? Genuinely and increasingly so. This is one of the leanest, most durable media models available to an independent operator today. The list is owned, not rented, protecting the business from the platform volatility that constantly threatens creators on social media. The sponsorship economics reward engagement over raw reach, favoring quality audiences over vanity metrics. The margin structure rewards consistency and lets a solo operator run a business that would have required an entire publishing staff a generation ago. And the diversification path, subscriptions, sponsorships, courses, communities, means a well built newsletter rarely depends on just one source of income to stay healthy. The free email in your inbox isn't a hobby project. For the operators who understand this model, it's one of the most quietly efficient businesses being built in media today, requiring less capital, less staff, and less infrastructure than almost any other format capable of generating comparable revenue at scale. That's the real economics behind owning a newsletter business. An owned audience that no algorithm can take away, sponsorship rates built on genuine attention, and a margin structure that rewards consistency over scale. If videos like this help you see industries differently, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from. See you in the next one.